Hello, and I may not remember who I was, but I know who I am. Welcome to Best of the Rest. My name is Chris Logan, and I am joined, as always, by who I remember to be my co-host, Andrew Williams. How you doing today, Andrew?
You know. Oh, whoa, let's try that again. You know.
Much. I'm glad you elaborated so much more in your second attempt there. So much more insight into how you're doing, Andrew. What's new? I mean, it's funny I ask you that every time we record, but I mean we talk every day. I guess I kind of know what's going on in your life for the most part. A lot of movie purchases, I think, for the both of us, which is, as someone who loves physical media, loves movies, as we both do, whenever there's sales, it's like the best and worst thing at the same time, especially since it seems to happen all at once. Vinegar Syndrome is a boutique label that I really like, and they just had a huge halfway to Black Friday sale, which sounds like just an excuse to have a sale, but it seems like every one of these labels or websites is having a sale. So it's the lowest this movie is ever going to be. I feel like I have to buy it, but you're angry about making these purchases. But
right. I mean, that's the nicest way to put it. The Criterion sale is usually July. I think it's July and November. So I know I've got a little bit of breathing room before that one starts, and there are definitely some things. I think Blue Velvet got upgraded, stuff like that. But yeah, Kino Lorber, obviously the one that's kind of on our minds right now, because that's the one that Barnes & Noble just shocked. I didn't expect, suddenly, boom, Kino Lorber
half
50% off sale, which Kino Lorber stuff sometimes gets there on its own, but not usually, especially if it's new. So yeah, I just spent $120 on Kino Lorber discs, including
and
many.
What are some of your pickups, Andrew?
Oh, so obviously the biggest one is Mystery Men. The Kino Lorber did a 4K of the greatest movie of our time. And it's funny because the day they announced it, it's everything sold out online. So I just left it. I was like, all right, I guess not. And I was going to kind of wait and see if Amazon matched any of them, and it looks like they have on some of them, but not others. So I went back in last night, and almost everything was back in stock, including some stuff on a different sale that was back in stock. So I went Mystery Men. I went with In Bruges, another one of my favorites, starring a man
Colin
we'll be talking
Farrell,
about a lot more in a little bit.
In Bruges, is that your favorite Colin Farrell performance, Andrew?
Yeah, probably. It's
gotta be, right?
It's up there.
I got a soft spot for Bullseye, but In Bruges is probably his best performance.
It is, because it's such an interesting performance for me, because he's not the most likable person in that movie, obviously, but then there's this arc that not necessarily an arc, but a storyline that runs through it, where you end up having a sympathy for this character, and kind of what he's dealing with, and over the course of the movie he reveals that he himself obviously has more layers than he may have realized. And so it's one of those characters, if you watch the first 20 minutes of In Bruges, you would just be what's the deal? This guy's insufferable. I hate everything he's saying. I hate everything he's doing. What's the point? And then by the end of it, you're just kind of oh, I feel kind of bad for you. You genuinely feel kind of bad for the guy. And Brendan Gleeson is in that one too. Obviously Brendan Gleeson is great in everything he's in, but they reunited. Rafe Fiennes in one of his best performances too. He's not in the movie very much, but just the weird unhinged performance he gives in that is just amazing. And they're basically the three characters in that movie. There's a few other smaller characters that come in and out, but it's really just the three of them. Obviously Gleeson and Farrell reunited for the Banshees of Inisherin a couple years ago, or last year, whenever that was, and that was another they're both, again, great in that movie. It's very different. They play very different types of characters. If anything, in that one, it's a little bit reversed, where Gleeson is kind of the more unlikable, kind of rough around the edges character, and Farrell's just kind of the hapless, slightly dim-witted guy who doesn't really understand what's happening, which, again, acting. But so In Bruges, once I didn't even know Kino Lorber had done In Bruges in 4K, so that shows how plugged in I am. But once I saw that was there, I was like, yeah, I gotta have that one too.
Gotta get it.
They filled it out with Touch of Evil, just a classic, film noir. Orson Welles at the peak of his powers, which is a weird thing to say because the first movie he made was Citizen Kane. So, like,
I say that's arguably the peak of his powers.
I was gonna say that, or as the line from Superbad once said, "Now I understand why Orson Welles ate his fat ass to death." So Touch of Evil, and then Got Dressed to Kill, a Brian De Palma, one of his kind of Hitchcock send-ups that he did. He did a couple of those, and in the 80s. It's the other one I'm thinking of.
Body Double,
which is a Rear Window kind of send up which again, great. I think the first time I watched Body Double,
I love that movie so much.
And then obviously right around the same time as Blowout, which is just kind of a conspiracy movie with John Travolta, also great. So Got Dressed to Kill, also closed out the Kino Lorber stuff with a little classic called Face Off.
I love Face Off.
So good.
God,
John Woo's best Hollywood movie for sure.
Easily,
like, no
right?
question. No question. Like
Hard Target, Broken Arrow, Face Off, Mission Impossible 2, and Paycheck. Is that all of them?
Ugh. Letters from Iwo Jima, I think, is in there too. Or no, was that the one he did?
Clint Eastwood?
No, he did some. What am I thinking of? I'm thinking of. This just makes for great podcasting when I have to figure all this stuff out. Wind Talkers. He did Wind Talkers.
Okay.
Which is another war film with Nicolas Cage, but not Letters from Iwo Jima. Much different.
Very different.
Yeah.
But it's Face Off, right? I mean, that's got to be number one. It's
with a bullet.
I can't
like, not
even explain to you why that one is head and shoulders above. I like Hard Target a lot, but like that feels so low budget. But like when he goes all the way with Face Off, I can't explain to you why that works so much more than like Mission Impossible 2, which we talked about in our podcast, because they're both like insanely over the top and ridiculous. I could say the same thing about both of them, but it just worked. I think part of it is like you have John Travolta and Nicolas Cage, who are just notorious overactors, and it lets them both be unhinged, and it just fits. It elevates the tone of the movie. I don't know exactly what it is, but Face Off is just a perfect 90s action movie.
It's the sum of its parts. It's because like Hard Target is like it's got Jean-Claude Van Damme, and like Jean-Claude Van Damme is cool, but like he's not the greatest actor in the world. He's kind of known for being Jean-Claude Van Damme more than anything. But with Face Off, you've got John Woo's direction, John Woo's action. You have just an insane plot. Like, just, it's ridiculous in what it is. It's basically paying two actors to spend most of the movie playing the other person. And then you've got two actors doing it that are two of, at the time, most popular actors who, like you said, are just notoriously overacting and notoriously just going for it. And I think when you mix that together, you got a stew going, baby. So, yeah, it's literally, it's Face Off is the sum of its parts. Whereas something like Hard Target is fine, or like Mission Impossible 2 is like, it's fine, but like Face Off also doesn't have, I mean, Hard Target didn't have any expectations. But like Mission Impossible 2 was like, it's a big studio blockbuster tentpole thing. They've got expectations for it. There's definitely more eyes on you. Whereas Face Off, I think everybody involved just kind of got to go ham and could kind of just roll with that however they wanted to. And we're better as a society for it. So that had to be it. And then I closed it out with a Paul Verhoeven movie, Benedetta. Benedetta
is how I've been saying it. Yeah, it's like I think it's like 1800s, and it's like a nun that is secretly a lesbian. It sounds super Paul Verhoeven. I also picked that up. I got that digital though, so I'm. I guess we'll both be diving.
It was like, that one I came back in the sale. That's part of the AMC sale. So it's a different 50% off sale going on right now. And I was just like, good God, there is too much to buy. There is too much out there, and I just don't know what I'm supposed to do with all of it. And I do want to say, you were the one that got me Existence, I think.
Oh yeah,
off of the Vinegar Syndrome sale, and I will tell you, I think Vinegar Syndrome is now sold out of that. So,
Oh, nice.
I must extend my appreciation for you snagging that for me.
The best part of these sales is like you buy all the stuff, then forget what you bought, and then it shows up a couple weeks later, and you're like, oh, this is a fun treat. Like, I got Existence from the Vinegar Syndrome sale for you. I got New York Ninja, I think it's called, which is like a movie that was shot in the 80s by a Hong Kong director, but the distribution company went under, so they never released the movie. And then Vinegar Syndrome recovered the footage, had no audio, no script, and they cut it together with what they believed to be the story and read the lips to try to figure out the dialogue, hired a team to dub it,
God.
and put the movie together. It just sounds bonkers, and I can't wait to watch it. I got Tammy and the T-Rex on 4K, which is an absurd 90s movie with Paul Walker about a T-Rex, because it was the 90s. This is dinosaur time. I got see, I can't even remember what all we got. I know I got Bat Puss, which I will probably have to bleep on this podcast, so that'll be a fun one to jump into. But yeah, good times. Too many movies. I mean, I order these movies. Don't ask me how long it's to take for me to actually watch them. That's the curse of collecting these things. But
I think of this, Liz always kind of questioned why I have so many books. You can see all my books behind me. And she finally read something once that buying the books is not about necessarily reading them all as soon as you buy them. It's about having them when you need them. It's basically like when the moment strikes that that's the book that I want, it's there when I want it. I view the movies very similarly. It's not about acquiring it and then like digesting it all immediately. And I mean, part of it, you're excited to get something. You're definitely going to open it up and watch it immediately. Like when I get The Fall Guy, I'm going to rewatch The Fall Guy immediately. There's not going to be any question there. But there's movies like, especially some of these classics, like Touch of Evil is a great movie, but Touch of Evil is not a movie I watch for fun necessarily. Like I'm not going to be like, let's pop in Orson Welles' Touch of Evil for some fun Saturday night popcorn viewing. I just watched a movie called I think it's Gonjiam Haunted Asylum. And it's a South Korean horror film, found footage to a degree. But no, it is found footage, not to a degree. It just is found footage. But it's about these people that investigate a haunted asylum as for like this live streaming show. And it's my friend had watched it and was like, dude, this is one of the scariest movies I've ever watched. And I was like, oh, really? And I went and looked. I bought it in October of 2022.
and you watched
just
it,
never
you
watched
watched it now, though?
I watched it last night, yeah, in between
and do
sci-fi
you
remakes.
Concur with what your friend has said?
It's, that third act is intense.
What's it called again?
It's called Gonjiam Haunted Asylum, Gonjiam Haunted Asylum. The first hour is kind of building, and you've got definitely some stuff that's working and some stuff that's a little bit more just kind of tropey. But then, yeah, that third act, I was just like, oh boy. I was like the heart started pumping during some of the sequences where I was like, oh Jesus. But I thought it was really, really good. But yeah, I bought it but I had it when now suddenly my friend had watched it. So it was one of the scariest thing he's watched, and it was. And so that's definitely
that's a healthy attitude to have. Like I had to do that eventually with video games. Like I have a video game backlog that's just I own a lot of games I've never played. But if you had zero backlog, that means you'd have to play the game as soon as you obtained it, as soon as you got it, right? So you're always forced to play a very specific game. But like, I don't want to get stuck into an 80-hour game and I can't jump off and play something else. Or like, I'm not always in the mood to play like a Last of Us. Sometimes I want like an indie game that's just gonna turn my brain off and be cute and fun, So it's important to have those different flavors, if you will. Like to your point, like depending on what your mindset is when you want to sit down with a game or a movie or a book, you want to have those options. So I think it's healthy, but it also kind of enables some bad spending habits, but you got to find the healthy balance in the middle. But Andrew, this week, however, I did watch a film that I had never seen before. I tend to, when I do have some time to finally sit down and watch a movie, I watch something that I know or I'm comfortable with, familiar with, but I'll watch the new one. I did it for this podcast because each week on Best of the Rest, we take a second look at a movie that was poorly received upon release and challenge ourselves to only talk about the things we like and what the movie does well. It is Sci-Fi Reboot Month, and this week we are talking the 2012 film Total Recall. I think I said on a previous episode, this is a movie that I had told myself I would probably never watch it. I love the original. I heard the reception of this one. Trailers didn't look interesting. I'm like, yeah, I don't need to see a new take on Total Recall. No hate or nothing. But I was like, yeah, I'll probably never sit down and watch that. Obviously, I did. Here we are with this podcast. But Andrew, what is your history with this movie?
I definitely saw this in theaters. This would have been August of 2012. So I guess I had just come back to Houston. I think I mean, I was in Huntsville, so, I wasn't not in Houston. I was in Houston, but it's there's got to be a better way to say that. I think I just moved back, so I saw this. I probably saw it at the Alamo Drafthouse, no less, with my sister, I'm guessing. But I generally left almost no impression. I can't say that I thought about it very much in the ensuing months / 12 years almost since
so
this
like
came
good
out.
or bad. You weren't like, wow, that was absolute garbage. I have to warn everybody to stay away, but you weren't blown away. It was just
like it's I guess it's kind of like how I felt after I saw Justice League for the first time. Like it just went through my brain. It like went in one eye out the other, basically. Like walking out the theater, there was like nothing left, and I just watched it. And this was kind of similar, where I was like, there's a lot of this movie's low key kind of stacked, and it just doesn't send. It's just nothing there really, and I was kind of, that's so weird. And so I never really thought about it again. Like I'd see it pop up, like it's on sale, and I'd be like, all right, and like I just never thought about it. And so I've never like intensely disliked it. I saw like on the wiki they said it's considered one of the worst remakes ever made, and I was like, is it? Like, okay. And so I was interested to go back and kind of see if if the memories I had of this movie were indeed implanted or not. So
the movie was released August 3rd of 2012, made on a budget of $125 million. At the box office, it brought in worldwide $211.8 million, much lower than what they wanted or needed to make a profit. Critically, it holds just a 31% on Rotten Tomatoes, so it is not well received. Audience score a little bit higher, but still not well received. I could honestly say I heard nothing good about this movie when it came out, hence my feelings for it that I already discussed. Taking a look at the creative team, we have two writers here. First off, we have Kurt Wimmer, who previously wrote The Thomas Crown Affair, the remake, and The Recruit, starring Colin Farrell. So there you go. You put those two things together, and you get Total Recall, a remake starring Colin Farrell. In addition to his writing credits, though, he is also a director. He is the writer and director of such films as Equilibrium, Ultraviolet, and Children of the Corn, which apparently they remade a few years ago. I don't even remember hearing about that. But all three of those movies I just listed, I think could be future episodes of this podcast. And I got to say, personally, I already added Equilibrium to our spreadsheet, Andrew, because I've got quite a soft spot for that movie. I'd love to dive into it.
I'm sure it'll happen eventually. We just did sci-fi reboots. We could just do sci-fi not reboots.
Sci-fi not reboots. That's what we call it.
Well, and I didn't even realize he wrote this Children of the Corn remake because I don't know if you know this, man. There are a lot of Children of the Corn movies. Like,
I briefly read, I think that's the 11th one, but it's only the third to release in theaters.
Yeah, and it was released in 2020, but didn't get a theatrical release until March of 23, and then its box office is $575,000. So it got a theatrical release.
Well, that's why I haven't heard of it.
Technically, but Not really, if we're being honest. I remember seeing that come out, and that has 12% on Rotten Tomatoes. So I'm sure we'll be talking Children of the Corn. We could do a Children of the Corn month. We could do like Children of the Corn Field.
You could do a Children of the Corn summer. Like there's, we could do 3 months of it.
I guarantee not a single one of those movies is rated positively, so all of them would probably work. And then the last one is just a book club where we read the book and see if it's any better. But I did not realize he wrote and directed Equilibrium. I did not realize he was a writer on Expendables 4, which I will be honest with you, would also be a prime candidate for this show. But I also see that he was a writer on The Beekeeper, which was one of the greatest movies ever made that came out earlier this year starring Jason Statham.
I did not catch that one, but that is one I saw the trailers. I'm like, you know what? This looks fun and dumb, and I need this in my life.
If David Ayer made movies like that all the time and stopped whining about Suicide Squad, he'd probably be my favorite director ever. But it's just so reading Kurt Wimmer's filmography is a very strange experience, because you've also got stuff like Street Kings and like Law Abiding Citizen hidden in there. The Point Break remake. This guy can't stop doing remakes. He's got the Thomas Crown Affair. He's got Total Recall. He's got Point Break. He's got Children of the Corn. He's got 4 remakes under his belt. So I mean, he's not afraid of them, which, you know, they keep asking him to do them. So I guess, you know, got to eat. But yeah, so it's still out there. Obviously, The Beekeeper just came out this year, and it low-key rules. So I'm not going to... So Kurt Wimmer out there doing the Lord's work, as it were.
And our other credited writer is Mark Bomback, writers of such films as Live Free or Die Hard, Race to Witch Mountain, the remake, of course, and Unstoppable, that Tony Scott movie with Denzel Washington and Chris Pine about the train that
also
can't stop.
Rules.
I also haven't seen it, but I've got to watch these because
it's awesome.
That's what I've heard. It's one of those. Unlike The Beekeeper, I saw those trailers. I'm like, well, this looks dumb, like not in a good way. But I keep hearing that hey, you know what? That's actually really cool. It's actually really fun. The performances are actually really great. So, yeah, I gotta catch up on these, Andrew.
That was Tony Scott's last feature film. Unstoppable's great. Yeah, you need to watch it though. But Tony Scott, I mean, a legendary director in his own right, did a little movie called True Romance that, for film nerds, is probably one of his more notable things. But probably the original Top Gun, also on the list. Man on Fire, Spy Game, Enemy of the State. He's great. And Unstoppable is awesome. I did also see Mark Bomback as a writer on all of the original new Planet of the Apes trilogy. He did an uncredited write on Rise of the Planet of the Apes, and then he's got credits on Dawn of the Planet of the Apes and War for the Planet of the Apes, which those are awesome. So again, yeah. Mark Bomback apparently just deep in the remakes, the remakes category, even the legacy sequels, if we're counting Live Free, Die Hard there. But I guess if you're going to get people to remake a movie, these are your guys to call, I suppose. It does give credit to the original Total Recall writers, which I didn't realize there were 4 of them. Of, you know, Ronald Shusett, Dan O'Bannon, Gary Goldman, and John Poville, and then obviously this is still sort of based off of the Philip K. Dick short story We Can Remember It For You Wholesale,
which I don't think is officially credited anywhere in this movie's credits, which is...
I think it's in the final credits. I don't think it's in the intro credits. I think it's in the final credits, though. But it does call out that it's based off the 1990 movie, which I would assume means you would have to call out that it's based off the short story, but maybe not.
This movie is directed by Len Wiseman, director of the first 2 Underworld movies, probably what he's most known for still. Also the director of Live Free or Die Hard, so he worked with Mark Bomback previously, and he's going to be directing the upcoming movie Ballerina, which is the John Wick spinoff starring Ana de Armas. We'll see how that turns out. Before his directing credits, had a background in effects work and worked on a number of notable films there before hopping into that director's chair.
Yeah, it's actually interesting looking at his filmography and seeing some of the stuff that he was involved with. Stargate, Independence Day, Men in Black as a props guy. Even a semi-alum of the show, worked on 1998's Godzilla. We just didn't talk about him because we are heathens and plebeians who do not understand the technical aspects of film.
Also, like, our podcast can only be so long. And we talk about the writers and directors. If we start talking about prop guys and editors and cinematographers, it's all important. We love it all, but come on.
It is interesting to me that Ballerina will be his first feature film since Total Recall. Did do some television in the ensuing years. Worked on Lucifer, The Gifted, which was the not X-Men show, and then did some episodes of Swamp Thing as well. Tons of music videos in the late 90s, early 2000s before he got into directing feature films. So, kind of just... to his credit, like, just worked his way up. Like, genuinely kind of just watching a guy just grind away at his job, eventually working his way up the ladder. And, that's pretty cool. I remember Kevin Smith tells some stories about Live Free, Die Hard, and he makes no bones about the fact that movie was apparently very hard on Len Wiseman just because it was the first Die Hard movie in a really long time. There was a lot of pressure on it to kind of get it right. And, like, he would show up to set and just look like he would just look horrible. And Kevin Smith was like, dude, are you all right? And he's like, nah, I got a stomach ulcer. And he's like, oh, does that happen a lot? And he's like, no, never. So definitely got put through the ringer on that one. And then did Total Recall. But yeah, working his way back to feature films now. But it's cool to see a guy just work his way up like that.
Andrew, I think it's time that we jump into this movie and talk about everything we like, everything it does well, all of the positives about Total Recall 2012. Are you ready to do this?
Yes.
Douglas Quaid is a construction worker living in the colony, one of 2 areas of the Earth that are still inhabitable. He works in the other hospitable part of the globe known as the United Federation of Britain. After being tormented by a recurring dream where he is fighting for a righteous cause alongside a woman that is not his wife, Quaid can't shake the feeling that he is destined for a more exciting life. He visits the company Recall, which implants memories of an adventurous life into their customer's brain. But before he can complete the procedure, the room is raided by UFB soldiers who begin hunting Quaid down. After his wife reveals their marriage was a cover and she is actually an agent tasked with bringing him in, Quaid doesn't know what he can believe anymore. After being rescued by the woman from his dreams named Melina, he learns that he was a resistance fighter trying to take down the Cohagen Corporation. But when the resistance tries to pull a secret code that could change the course of the war from his brain, Chancellor Cohagen himself appears and explains that Quaid is actually a spy sent to infiltrate the resistance and bring them down. Now, Quaid must decide not only which of his past lives are real, but which he chooses to believe. Andrew, I tried to make these synopsises as short as possible, just a little refresher. Assuming you've seen the movie. If you haven't, here's the basics, but I can't leave any of those turns out because it just keeps building and building. It's pretty dense. I feel like by and large they're telling the same story as the original movie, but it feels denser. I think there's enough little twists added that really compound the nature of this plot.
It's involved. Then again, like I try to think of like the original Total Recall. Would you be able to give like a short? You can't. I would feel like the synopsis for that would be just as long as this one, really, when you start diving into like what that movie is about and how it all unfolds. But
it's much short. It's Quaid is a construction worker. He goes to Recall, then he goes to Mars, and he says, "Give these people air." That's it.
Cohagen, give these people
Come
air.
on, Cohagen.
Come on,
give these people air.
See you at the party, Richter. That's not what the show is about, folks. I'm sorry. It also, like, there's a piece of my brain now that, like, should we really be making fun of this man's accent? I mean, it's literally just how the man talks. But I think we're okay. I'm not
Unless Arnold like gives an interview where he's like, "I'm really sensitive about this," maybe I change my feelings. But, it's
for now,
it's out of love. It's not.
Yeah.
I love this man's movies and I love his work. It's fantastic.
Too bad he's not in this one, so we should talk about who's in it.
Let's do exactly that, Andrew. Talk about who's in this movie. Talk about this cast, starting with the high point: best casting, best performance of the film. Because every episode, we recognize one person who goes so far above and beyond the Call of Duty that they actually elevate the quality of the film with their performance, and we recognize that person by giving them the Mark Strong Award. Andrew, kick us off here. Who is getting your Mark Strong Award for Total Recall 2012?
So, despite the kind of massive scope of this film, there's really only like 5 or 6 core actors. But I'm going to go with not really our main villain, but essentially our kind of boots on the ground villain. She starts off as Quaid's wife, and then is revealed to be an operative, much like in the original film with Sharon Stone. It is Sharon Stone, right?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Just had a brief crisis of, oh no, how much of a fool am I going to be on this edited podcast? But anyway, so she starts off, she's very supportive of him. She's like trying to like calm him when he's got these kind of nightmares. But then once the veil is turned back, she just turns on him almost immediately. And that's Kate Beckinsale as Lori, as Wikipedia describes her, an abusive UFB undercover agent. Abusive specifically. So she starts off just kind of being, like I said, very, she's just supporting him as he tries to figure stuff out. And then like there's literally like a scene where it just hard switches from like one to the other. And you can tell almost immediately. And then for the rest of that movie, you can tell she is relishing just playing the villain and like just running with it. Seems to be having some of the most fun of anybody in this movie. Just really enjoying basically getting to beat up Colin Farrell and Jessica Biel for the rest of this movie. And ultimately is one of the last villains standing by the end of this. But she's having a blast with it. And so it's tough to not feel that watching it too. So I'm going to go with Kate Beckinsale as Lori. I don't know. Does she have another name? Does it eventually get revealed? I don't know.
I think just Lori. That's all I saw too. But I think this is a great pick. I think, I mean, what a badass. She probably gets like the best action of the movie. And I love the switch, like you said, because when she's just playing his wife, there's really nothing to the character. She's just the wife of our main character. But you get this reveal that she is an agent supposed to take him down. And then, as you said, it looks like she's just really enjoying the role after that. And there's jokes throughout the entire movie about them, being husband and wife. And I give good wife. I think that might be a line from the original they reused here. But I like the almost playfulness that they have in their action scenes, even though they're legitimately trying to kill each other. And I think it is pretty fun. So I think this is a pretty good pick for the Mark Strong Award, Andrew. I'm gonna go with someone else, but I think I like this performance just because of the comparison to Kate Beckinsale. I think we're gonna do two sides of the same coin here, Andrew, because I want to give my Mark Strong Award to Jessica Biel as Melina. This is the woman that he first sees in his dreams, and then they meet up together. She's part of the resistance. She's trying to help him remember who he used to be. And it gets way more deep than that. But she is almost like a yin and yang, whereas Lori pretended to be his wife, but actually she's trying to kill him. Melina is this woman from his dreams that he doesn't remember, but she actually loves him, and they used to be romantic, and it's just all kind of tangled up together. So the reason I'm going Jessica Biel is because she gets this extra layer where she gets to be sort of vulnerable and tender, like she actually has a teardrop and a very pivotal scene in this movie. So I think because she gets that sort of extra human side beyond just Terminator-esque killing machine, which I do like, which is what Kate Beckinsale is doing, and I do like. I think it's worthy of a Mark Strong Award. I want to recognize the other side of it, where we have just the much more human take on the character. And Jessica Biel, alum of the show many times over. We've talked about her a lot. I don't think she has picked up a Mark Strong award. I think this is her first one. No way to check.
No way to check.
But The Illusionist, Blade Trinity. I think there was a third one. What else did we talk about her? And in the A-Team. The A-Team. She's in that too. So yeah, we talked about her quite a bit. And I've said I really think she's fantastic as an actor. And just following her career, like the other endeavors that she's ventured out on, I think is very cool, very respectable. And I want to give her flowers here properly with the Golden Sphere we call the Mark Strong Award.
I think this is a great pick. Chris, have you ever heard of Seventh Heaven?
The TV show?
Yes.
Yeah, of course I've heard of Seventh Heaven. Yeah.
That show is insane. It's one of those things that you go back and you watch now, and it just genuinely kind of seems unhinged.
I mean, I can't say I've watched it now, but
putting aside the controversies about like the lead actor of the show, like the father,
very horrible. Yes,
very horrible. We don't need to talk about that. But just like some of the plots of that show were just like the gif that you always see, or the clip that I always see these days. It's one where like the mom is talking to the husband, and she just goes like, "Once I smoked pot," and the husband just looks so like disappointed and like filled with grief, and he's just like like, this is earth shattering. And it's like, oh my God. But like so much of the show was stuff like that, where it was just like, nowadays it just feels so inconsequential.
It's like an after school special made into a sitcom.
Basically, yeah.
It's like a pastor's family, right?
It's very much like a religious show that's clearly like, he's Protestant, I think, and they deal with the drama of raising their 7 children, which, yeah, anyway. So she clearly got out. She's kind of one of the main ones from that show that did. But, yeah, we've gotten to talk about her a lot. I think she is doing some interesting stuff here. Like you said, she gets to be a little bit more human. Colin Farrell's character is a little bit more confused on a lot of different levels. And so I think this is a good pick. So after many, many appearances on the show, finally, like you said, getting the coveted golden orb that is Mark Strong's head.
And the lead of this movie, we've mentioned him already. Colin Farrell plays Douglas Quaid, or perhaps Carl Hauser. Kind of a big mystery to this guy's true origins. And this is something they really play with as far as mixing it up and changing things from the original. I feel like in the original, it's been a minute since I've watched it, so correct me if I'm wrong, but the conspiracy that he gets caught up in isn't revealed until after he visits Recall. And the sort of conceit of that movie, the Philip K. Dickness of that movie is, well, is this conspiracy even real, or is it just the memories that he asked for? Whereas in this movie, we get introduced to the conflict before he goes to Recall. So the conflict is real. His involvement, you can still say, is up for grabs, or who he used to be. Was he originally a resistance fighter? Was he originally working for Cohagen? That is kind of left up to you to determine, but there's more layers to this character. Like in the first one, we know he's a construction worker, and then he gets caught up in this stuff. In this one, he could have been involved in conspiracy all along. We don't really know.
Yeah, we don't. This one is definitely playing with a lot more of the shades. Like the conspiracy is revealed immediately, and then the character unfolds. Yeah, the original, we're not really even sure. Man, now I'm just like, no, I'm pretty sure. Man, now I don't remember. Now I'm.
Let's just pause the podcast and go watch the original.
Or it'll come back
because he doesn't go to Mars until after he visits Recall, and that's where everything takes place. In the first one is on Mars, like
right.
On
but
Earth,
I'm trying to remember what the conceit of that is. But like Cohagen is basically the governor of Mars, and he's just super awful to most of the people that live there. Like all the people that are in like the slums are kind of the. And you know, he has basically the conceit of that is they have the ability to give the people air and they don't. Or they don't know what the machine even does. I don't even know if Cohagen knows what it does. But then he's slowly suffocating all the people. So yeah.
Okay, we don't need to get too. I'm sorry for the tangent about the original. We're talking about the remake. But my point is, Colin Farrell's playing a very different character, even if they have the same name.
Yes.
I mean, it's all about who to believe, which past to believe. It's almost like a character with amnesia. That's not exactly the conceit of this movie, but that is a trope we've seen a number of times, where a main character hits their head or whatever and can't remember who they are, and they have to try to learn. It's a lot like that. His world gets shattered, and then he has trouble putting the pieces back together. So Colin Farrell he's very good at this wide-eyed, confused look. Yeah, he gets to use it a lot in this movie.
Well, because he keeps getting like new information about himself, and every time he's just and I mean, I love Colin Farrell. Like I'm pretty sure we talked about him before. Obviously, Daredevil, love of the show.
Yeah. Maybe got a Mark Strong award there. I don't know. There's no way to check. I don't think so.
I'm pretty sure I gave it to Michael Clark Duncan. You might have given it to Colin Farrell. I don't remember.
No way to check.
Again, no way to check. It's and he's just great. I mean, I like Colin Farrell a lot. Obviously stuff like In Bruges, we talked about it earlier, but anything he's done with Martin McDonagh, whether that was, Seven Psychopaths, The Banshees of Inisherin, he was in a movie with Guy Ritchie did a couple years ago called The Gentleman. This is one of my favorites of recent years. It's just a really great, and his performance particularly, I think, is really, really good. Obviously, Penguin in The Batman, where if you don't know
totally
it's him,
forgot about that. Yeah,
you're not even gonna know. And
apparently that show is still happening. Did you see that?
Yeah. Like I saw a trailer for it, so that'll be wild. And now he's apparently, I just saw on his thing when I was looking at this, that he's got a private detective show that he's in now. And so I'm like, well, I guess I have to watch that now. So Colin Farrell, pretty talented, and yeah, also was in Michael Mann's Miami Vice, if you're into that sort of thing. The movie, not the show.
Now, Andrew, to watch this movie, it is streaming on Netflix, but as I've discussed, I don't have Netflix currently, so I resorted to just renting the movie. It was like $3, and literally what I did is I hit the Google Assistant button on my remote. I said Total Recall 2012. It popped up. I hit rent. I watched the movie. Okay. Now, there's a pivotal scene in the movie where he finds out that his face isn't even his face. When they gave him a new memory, they also altered his appearance, and he's given these clues to find out who he used to be. He left messages for himself, and at one point, he has this hologram that he talks to that he recorded previously, and in the hologram, he is played by Ethan Hawke. This is what he used to look like before he had the surgery, and Ethan Hawke has given him some background on the situation that they're in. I thought it was a really cool scene because I love Ethan Hawke. It was a fun surprise. He's even uncredited for that role, so like if you saw this in theaters, this is what I'm thinking at the time. You saw this in theaters, you don't know Ethan Hawke is going to pop up. Well, apparently I watched the director's cut, Andrew, because I'm reading about this movie, and it says Ethan Hawke appears only in the director's cut. A scene was cut. I was like, wow, I thought that was a really fun scene and really cool. And I think the thing about his face being altered isn't even in the theatrical movie.
No. And
also, I think Melina is the Resistance leader's daughter. I think that might be another. I was reading all the differences, so I don't know. I saw 12 extra minutes of this movie. Like I said, I didn't even mean to watch the director's cut, but I'm just bringing this up because we're talking about the character of Douglas Quaid. I want to shout out Ethan Hawke for his little hologram performance. Somewhat alum of the show. We talked about him briefly in Glass Onion. I think the one time he came up, but I'm a huge fan of Ethan Hawke. I hope we get to talk about him some more, but I thought that was a really fun casting.
Yeah, it was. Too bad I didn't see it. So question, does the hologram at the apartment with the piano?
I'm wondering how that works without Ethan Hawke, because the whole thing is he puts the key in the piano and Ethan Hawke pops up. So what do you get in the theatrical?
Colin Farrell.
Oh, so that scene plays out, but it's
just Colin Farrell.
They shot it with Colin Farrell.
Yeah.
Oh, I assume they just cut that scene. Why would they change that?
So at some point
they cut out the
decided
subplot
of him changing his face. So,
wow. Okay.
But there's that scene in the safety deposit. He gets the safety deposit box, and he has that scene where he's watching the clip, in the director's cut, is that also Ethan Hawke, or is he Colin
No,
Farrell by that
that's
point?
Colin Farrell. Apparently, like that's right after
Post-surgery,
surgery. Yeah.
Here's what I don't understand. There's this. Okay, because why would you do the face surgery before you change his memories? Like, why would you leave that to chance? Like, it always like. There's this show I watch a lot. It's a Japanese superhero show akin to Power Rangers called Kamen Rider. I've probably mentioned it before. The conceit of it being
the exact plot detail you've mentioned before, but please go ahead. I love it. Go ahead.
I'm gonna do it again because in that show, a great many times they turn these guys into cyborgs, then attempt to brainwash them, but they always escape in the part between becoming a cyborg and getting brainwashed. And it's like, why are you not brainwashing them first? Like, why are you giving them the powers and then trying to put them onto your side? Do it in the reverse order, you jerks. But, otherwise I don't have a show. But, like, here it's the same thing. It's like, why would you change his face before?
Because you can't give him the memories of a new life, but have his old face. You can't do it.
Why is he awake for any of this? Like, why is he?
You could do it at the same time, I guess, is probably
the
best
or
solution.
you sedate him, leave him sedated for the whole time. Like, don't leave this to chance. Like, I don't get it. Anyway, it is a fun subplot, and I think it would have made that part of it a little bit more interesting. But it is a bummer. But yeah, because that was what I was curious about, was the hospital scene versus the apartment scene. And Ethan Hawke even said his part was like 5 pages of dialogue.
Yes,
like just a monologue,
basically 5 minutes. Yeah, it is pretty long.
And it's pretty deep. And any movie, the original movie has just the safety deposit box version of this. There's no real additional version of it later. And that's just Arnold talking to Arnold, which, if you're into that, awesome. But
are safety deposit boxes real? They have to be a real thing, but like, do you have to be like rich and affluent? Like, this is such a weird thing. It's always in like spy movies that, in the past they have this permanently reserved metal box in a bank. Like, could I go do that? Could I go to a bank and say I want a safety deposit box and I can just keep whatever I want in this vault?
Yeah, probably.
Huh. Kind of want to do that. Throw some movies in there or something.
I mean, it used to be pretty common that people put sensitive documents and stuff in a safety deposit box. That way it wasn't like in their house. So if they, back when, you were worried about all of your enemies coming to rob your house, or if you just wanted to make sure.
Fire or whatever.
Or just stuff, now fireproof safes in your home are pretty common. But like, people would get a safety deposit box and they would put, birth certificates, social security cards. A lot of that stuff would just go into safety deposit boxes. So yeah, if you went to a bank, I'm sure they could give you a safety deposit box, depending on what like branch it is or what they do. But yeah, it's a real thing. It's just not used much anymore. Like if somebody was
I just want to walk into a vault. Honestly, that's all I want. I just want to walk into a vault. I want the person to be like, okay, you have the room. I'll be right outside, and I have a little table, and I'm the only one in there, and I can pull out my box and look at my important stuff.
Yep, passports, birth certificate's still here. I'm good. Just like 30 seconds. It's as far as I know, it's still a thing. And yeah, I mean,
Andrew, Bryan Cranston is in this movie, alum of the show. Bryan Cranston, he played Zordon in Power Rangers. Don't know if he got a Mark-Strong award. There's no way to check, but we talked about him before. And Andrew, isn't it funny how, for someone our age, growing up, this guy was like the goofy dad from Malcolm in the Middle. He was a comedic actor. And then Breaking Bad happens, and all of a sudden he gets all these like super important dark roles. Not even always dark. Even something even like Godzilla is just he gets roles almost exclusively where he's a supporting actor, lending the movie some weight, some importance, some I don't know. What does he bring the movies that he's in post Breaking Bad, Andrew?
Gravitas.
That's it. Exactly. That becomes what he's known for. It's very distinct two halves of his career. And it's not 100% because like he does that comedy with James Franco post Breaking Bad. So yeah. So he does it a little bit, but still he's known by like to a whole new generation as like a super serious dramatic actor, and I just think it's pretty funny.
It is funny. Breaking Bad is definitely, I think, the thing that does that. I'm looking at his filmography, man. In the years 2011 and 2012 combined, he is in 13 movies.
Jesus Christ.
He is in a further 6 in the year 2016. Like, it's kind of... Now, some of these are voice roles, and almost all of them are, like, supporting roles of various levels. I mean,
Yeah.
Argo's in here, Drive's in here, John Carter, alum of the show, Bryan Cranston. Yeah, it's wild to see that, like, and that was even, I think, while Breaking Bad was still on. Like, I think Breaking Bad is on the air from 2008 to 2013. So, I mean, even like in the midst of Breaking Bad, he's doing tons of bit parts in movies and stuff. So, yeah, that definitely... After Breaking Bad, everyone was like, "Yep, we need Bryan Cranston to be that supporting role that needs some teeth." And yeah,
and that's what he's doing here.
He takes on the tremendously heavy burden of being this movie's Cohagen.
And it's good. It's definitely a different take on the character.
Yeah.
I think he's appropriately menacing and dark and evil. He gets a huge exposition dump that, like, I don't really mind because it's Bryan Cranston and I like the way that he talks. I think it's pretty good casting. There is a part where he's like in a fist fight with Colin Farrell. I'm like, okay, well,
I wasn't.
Yeah, okay, come on. But
I mean, Colin Farrell had been shot. I mean, he'd been shot. So
the only way to even the odds.
Hey, if you at least they tried to do something, I guess.
It's like in Rocky 6 where, like, he has one more match, but, like, his opponent literally has to break his hand for him to, like, make sense.
Feel
that
pain.
He can go toe to toe.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's not much to say about it other than it's Bryan Cranston and it's good.
He sits out most of the first half of the movie, just kind of like previs and like conversations and stuff, but the second half, and I guess especially more towards the third act, is when he definitely like physically enters the proceedings, and like you said, does genuinely have a fist fight with Colin Farrell, where you're just kind of like, all right now. But now that I think about it, how far apart in age are these men? Because I'm betting it's not as much as I think it is. Yeah, it is.
I'm gonna say 15 years.
It is 20 years.
There you go.
They take it back. I take it back completely. So, and then this was 12 years ago. So Bryan Cranston is 68, which, jeez. 12 years ago, he was 56. Oh, God. Do you know how old Colin Farrell was when he made this movie, man?
Is he going to make me sad?
It's going to make you very sad.
Is he 35? Is he my current age?
He's 36 when this movie comes out.
I'm turning 36.
He is my age. He is my age. I'm never going to be a man, ever. Never, ever, ever. Never, ever, ever. It's just not going to happen. Oh, God, I had another terrible thought, and now I got to follow up on it and see. Malcolm in the Middle starts in 2000. Okay, he's 44 when Malcolm in the Middle starts. All right, I'm not quite...
We still have time, Andrew. We have time.
I was waiting for it to be like, Bryan Cranston was 38 when Malcolm in the Middle started, and I was going to be like, oh, God. Like, Jesus Christ.
I think that covers our main players in this movie, but there's a few additional ones, additional performances I want to shout out. Like Bokeem Woodbine as Harry, who is Quaid's friend, his construction buddy. And we see him mostly before the visit to Recall, but he has one key scene after, which we will be talking about very soon, that I think he absolutely nails. I think this guy is fantastic. I mean, he's just like a blue-collar working stiff. It then gets to go a little bit deeper with that extra scene, so I want to shout him out. I recognized him like right away, but I wasn't sure where. I had to look into it. Andrew, as I've mentioned very recently, don't have Netflix, but as I also mentioned recently on this podcast, I was displaced for about 5 days after the storm came through. I had no power. I was staying at my mom's house where they do have Netflix, so I got to watch a little bit of Netflix over there. And I watched a movie called Old Dads, a Bill Burr movie on Netflix. Bokeem Woodbine is in it. That's where I recognized him from. And that movie is horrible. I don't recommend it. Hashtag
I was going to say.
It was so bad. I like Bill Burr. I like his comedy and stand-up. But it's it's
And
like
he like wrote and directed that too, didn't he?
he was very involved creatively. I don't know if he directed it, but he he's like an older generation, and then like everyone that plays the younger generation, the millennials or Gen Z, are all the most stereotypical, over the top. They have a super long Starbucks order. They don't discipline their children. Like every like single dumb stereotype you can think of. It was very anyway. I have nothing good to say about it, so I guess I'll stop talking. But that's how I knew who Bokeem was. I think he's very good in this movie.
He's usually very good. I remember he has a very, very bit part in Ghostbusters Afterlife. He plays the sheriff of this small town that they're in, that kind of reprimands these children when they start running around with the Ecto-1 and proton packs, because why wouldn't you? It's one of those things where it's like, I understand this movie's called Ghostbusters, but they did literally just drive around and like slice up the entire downtown of this little town with a laser. So maybe we could show some discretion. And he's also in the second season of Fargo. He actually, Spider-Man Homecoming, he plays one of the versions of Shocker that appears in that film.
Oh, yeah.
He plays, I think, second Shocker after not Tom Hardy Shocker gets disintegrated by Michael Keaton by accident. I thought that was the Shrieking Ray. Whoops. But anyway, he is really good. He's like just said, like kind of a lifelong character actor at this point. And still out there doing his thing. Old dad's not included. But here, like I said, he's got different stuff. Harry is the name of his friend in the original Total Recall as well, so they did carry that over. That original Harry played by Robert Costanzo. He's got, it's a bit part, but he's makes the most of every scene that he's in. And I think we will be talking about the scene I think you're thinking of soon, because I may also be thinking about it.
And then some very fun casting here. John Cho plays Mac. He is the person that works at Recall that's going to administer the procedure to Quaid. And I really like John Cho. And it's very interesting because like it felt like he was really going to blow up after Harold and Kumar. Like he breaks in like with these like comedies and almost like teen-oriented movies, and then starts getting roles like Star Trek, and he shows up here like these small supporting roles, and it feels like the next thing should be like his vehicle, and I feel like it never really happened. But I love anytime John Cho shows up, and what I love about him here is his hair is dyed blonde, which is like shorthand for this guy's eccentric, right? Anytime like they dye someone platinum blonde, it's like, oh, watch out for this guy. Like Benicio del Toro is the collector, like maybe his hair is white there, but you know the trope I'm talking about here. They apply it to John Cho here. I think he's got just the one scene, but I think it's a lot of fun and cool casting.
When you take a character that has dark hair and you make it a lighter color, you are definitely sending the message that they are weird now.
Yes.
The only exception maybe being Cody Rhodes.
He was weirder before? I think he's pretty weird now.
I mean, Stardust, he has dark hair, and now he has the blonde hair as the American Nightmare. And although with the blonde hair, he does get the neck tattoo. So I guess maybe Stardust didn't have a neck tattoo. So I guess maybe the current version is weirder. But no, I do like John Cho a lot. I mean, I do still have a lot of nostalgic fondness for that first Harold and Kumar movie. I think the second and the third, maybe a little less so. But that first one like came at a very specific, like I think it was 2004. So I was like almost out of high school. That was like my senior year. So like that movie, like when I was in college, like it hit just right. And I still have, I can still watch that movie and cringe at some of the things that definitely haven't aged well, which are not a small number of things, but it's still, I expected that to blow up into something bigger for him, especially once he got into Star Trek. But I do want to call out a movie he's in called
The Searching.
It's just called Searching.
Oh, Searching. Okay.
It's great. It's a found footage movie, but it's one of those ones that started. They call it a screen life movie, and I guess that's the idea is that it's all told on screens of devices versus like found footage necessarily.
Is that a genre of two? Because I feel like Unfriended is maybe the only other movie that did that.
Screen Life or Computer Screen Film. They list a few here, but Unfriended, I remember searching. Searching has spawned like some pseudo standalone things. There's another one called Missing, which came out I think last year. There's another one called Run. Apparently the people behind Searching have just kind of started making some anthology stuff using the concept. Okay. But I do like Searching a lot. I didn't realize that movie only cost $880,000 to make. But then again, I guess you don't got to worry too much about cameras or production crew or anything when you're just using screens to do everything. So a lot of post-production, I'm sure, but made a bunch of money. I have not seen Missing yet. I heard pretty good things, but just haven't gotten around to it because, again, there is so much stuff to watch. But it's a fun little scene that he's in. He basically takes over. I can't remember the character's name in the original. I don't think it's Mac, or maybe it's Mick something. But it is Bob McLean. It's Bob in the original, Bob McLean. And so we've gone with Mac this time. So, same thing, basically.
And then lastly, Andrew, I got to do it. I got to shout out Will Yoon Lee as Merrick. He's a coworker that directs him towards Mac. Very small scene, but it's Will Yoon Lee. I love this man. He's handsome. He's cool. He's a martial artist. He's in The Good Doctor. It's a good show. And I think he's even a Mark Strong Award winner for Elektra. He's come up like 5 times on our podcast. I got to shout him out every time. Will Yoon Lee. He's in this movie.
And Bill Nighy is also in this movie.
I felt much more strongly about Will Yoon Lee. Is that?
I know you did.
Bill Nighy is also a Mark Strong Award winner. Did we give him one for Andrew? This literally, we make the joke. It's impossible to keep track of these things, but for Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, right? That's when we talked about him before.
Yes, he plays Slaughter Bartfast in that one.
I don't think he had a Mark Strong Award, but I do.
I don't think he did. I think Sam Rockwell.
I loved his scene a lot in the end, though.
I think Sam Rockwell ran away with that one. Although he is in several. Bill Nighy is in several of the Underworld movies, so he may not also be done on this podcast just yet either. So there was also a period of time where the way you kind of described Bryan Cranston was also how people were using Bill Nighy. This was mostly after Pirates of the Caribbean. Where he played Davy Jones in a couple of those. Like after that, it felt like also that was when people just started bringing him in, essentially to be that kind of gravitas actor in notable small scenes. Like he did the Underworld stuff, obviously the Pirates movies. He shows up in some of the Harry Potters, but then just you look at even him throughout the early aughts. Every year, he's just got 2 or 3 movies that he's in where you're just like, yeah, you're just adding him to punch it up a little bit. Also in a alum of most of the Edgar Wright movies. He plays the chief inspector in Hot Fuzz. It's got one of my favorite lines where Simon Pegg's character is like, "You can't do that," and he's like, "Yes, I can. I'm the chief inspector." He's just great. But here he's literally, again, a couple of sequences, and then ultimately just, again, kind of one scene, really, at the end of the day. So there's definitely a few people that are just brought in to punch this up, leading to what you could say is a slightly stacked cast. There's plenty of people you heard of in this movie, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
But,
yeah. Andrew, with that, it's time that we talk about the actual scenes in this movie. And we, of course, are going to start with our personal favorite, what we consider the best scene of the film. So, Andrew, in your opinion, when is this movie firing on all cylinders? What is the best scene in Total Recall 2012?
I think you're going with the it's sort of a confrontation scene where Molina and Quaid get kind of trapped in the lobby of this building. They've got the police outside, and they send in Harry to kind of appeal to Quaid's sensibilities, and they throw the idea at him that this is not real. That is just an illusion.
What I'm picking. Are you saying this is also what you're picking?
It's also what I'm picking, because it's got some of the best stuff in the movie, and it's also when Quaid kind of makes his decision on what he's going to go with. And I think this ends up being a relatively, or arguably one of the most important scenes in the film as far as for a movie, we kind of talked about it, where when a character has amnesia, it can be kind of tough to follow because they don't know who they are. So how are you, the person, supposed to be sort of invested in what they're doing? Movies can use this effectively. Something like Memento, I think, uses this immensely well. But you're not necessarily supposed to root for the main guy in Memento. You're piecing together what's happening, because the amnesia is essentially the crux of the plot. Like, you are figuring it out in real time the same way he is, in a way. Whereas with this, like, there's this ongoing plot.
A key thing with Memento is that his amnesia is part of his personality. He still has a personality. Whereas a lot of times amnesia characters are just confused all the time and don't have a personality.
And so this is a scene where you see his character make a definitive decision one way or the other and sides with a certain way in a very overt sense. He's already kind of leaning a certain way, but in this one we finally it's finally like no going back at this point. He can't undo what he's done. And so this scene is really great. They put all the pieces there. They bring in his friend Harry. They put Laurie, his wife, back outside, and she's now back to being the heartbroken housewife who just wants her husband to come home. Like, all the pieces are there, and they're telling him all this. But the way that Bokeem is playing this scene, I think, is done immensely well. He's playing to all his sensibilities. He's sounding very reasonable. He's not, he's trying to be very careful in how he says everything, but he is telling him that, like, this isn't real. This isn't what you think it is. You're still a recall. Your wife's next to you. We're trying to get you back. And, you can come back. Like, it doesn't have to be this. Like, you can figure it all out. They do a number of these scenes in the original Total Recall. The notable one is where Arnold sees the guy sweating and that realizes he's lying. And this is played similarly, except instead of a sweat on the bad guy's forebrow, it's a tear in Molina's eye. And so then he ultimately makes his decision to shoot Harry and leave. Now, we never really figure out if Harry is, like, one of them necessarily. We know that Harry was employed by them, but we don't really know how far up it goes with Harry as far as whether he was also an operative or anything like that. But shooting him's a pretty definitive action. You can't come back from that. But the way that Colin Farrell is reacting, the way he's playing this, despite doing his kind of classic wide-eyed confusion, Jessica Biel giving a good performance as she's kind of watching him potentially get pulled away. Kate Beckinsale outside as Laurie, kind of switching hard from, like, the wife back to the ruthless operative in, like, a split second, almost a Superman-esque transition. And then Bokeem's performance in front of all of it is kind of the friend just playing the best friend's trying to play to his sensibilities. I think it all works well, and it's a tipping point for the rest of the movie, because this is obviously building to this moment. It's, there's still a path back to the other side until this moment, basically. And we don't know that they were actually going to keep him alive or anything. We have no idea. But once he kills Harry, it's over. And he's on the other path now, definitively, and he can't come back. So in that regard, I do think it is the best scene in the movie.
I like it a lot. It's also my favorite scene. And this movie, I mean, it's a $125 million budget, crazy effects, tons of action. But my favorite scene is this quiet moment, like, in the middle of all that, because the action doesn't mean anything if we don't have the motivations, right? And I think this is just so well done. It's so quiet. It's just these three characters. I think they're all crushing it. I love how Bokeem just has an answer for everything that he throws at him. He's like, you're still in that chair. I came in and they transfused me so I could come talk to you, but I'm still I'm not actually me. I'm just created by your mind. Because he's like, well, why are you wearing a bulletproof vest? Because you wanted me to. Why'd you lie to me? Because that's what you wanted me to say. Like, he just deflects every single thing. As Colin Farrell as Quaid is trying to, like, poke holes in his argument, he has, like, a comeback for everything. And I do love seeing Laurie through the glass back as the wife. It's just such a cool silent performance. I think Superman-esque might be a little lofty, but I think that
a little, yeah.
But it's the right idea. Like, it's all in the body language. Like, we can see, she's distraught wife, to where he shoots Harry. She takes off, like, the blanket she's draped over, like she's a distraught wife, and all of a sudden, just with her facial expression and her determination in her walk, she's back to being that Terminator-esque, like, killing machine. And Jessica Biel, I mean, this is probably the scene that tipped me to throw the Mark Strong Award her way, because she gets to have these quieter moments, sensitive moments. And again, in the version I watched, like, Bill Nighy is playing her dad, and his death is pretty impactful. Like, she gets those, a little bit of depth in these moments, and she sheds the tear. But she's also a capable badass. She pulls out her gun. She can't pull herself to pull the trigger. Like there's a lot going on in the scene. I think, and again, I guess it's been a minute since I've watched the original, but I feel like this movie is poking harder at the Philip K. Dick stuff. Where is this real? Is this not? I feel like that original, it's pretty easy just to get caught up in the conspiracy and not even think about the realities. I think it's a lot more subtext, whereas this one is, especially in scenes like this, constantly calling it out. No, your mind's been wiped. No, these are fake memories. No, you're back in the chair. I think they kind of poke that a lot more, and this is, obviously one of the big scenes where they really point to the, again, Philip K. Dickness, for lack of a better word.
The Dickness.
The Dickness.
he's Dick, man. No, I think that's largely true. I think it is interesting. The original short story is pretty wild, and it is a short story. It's not very long. And I don't know if I've talked about it before. I think I have. But I
don't think I read Minority Report, which is also way shorter than the movie that we got. But I feel like Total Recall, I feel like what We Sell You Dreams Wholesale, what's it?
We Can Remember It For You Wholesale.
Yes. I feel like that's more like creating the concept of recall, whereas the movie builds a story around the concept. But like these characters, by and large, aren't in that original story, right?
No, the story, Quaid is in this, and his name is Douglas Quayle. It's not Douglas Quaid. And so he's always wanted to visit Mars, but his wife keeps telling him not to. That's the conceit. And he's a menial office job, and it's sometime in the future. And he eventually goes to recall and wants to basically do the memories of going to Mars. So that's where that does come from. And then when they do the memory implant, they find out that he basically is a secret agent who has been to Mars. And that kind of kicks off the story. They kind of send him home. They kind of cancel the whole thing. But the process has unlocked all of those memories. But they're not quite clear yet. So he goes home and he's whatever. Believes it's all fake. But then when he gets home, he finds some stuff from Mars. And he's like, what? And basically as the story continues, he keeps getting presented with these memories that are increasingly more outlandish, but are true. And then ultimately it does kind of come to a head, that you find out. I won't give it away in case anybody wants to read it necessarily, but it does reach an ending that comes off with another twist about repressed memories and things like that. So the conceit of the original story very much is the notion of recall, but it does include the secret agent stuff. It does include the Mars stuff. The wife kind of being in on it is included as well. So there are a lot of factors in the original story that are here, but I don't believe he doesn't actually go to Mars in the original story. The idea of Mars is there, but he never actually goes there. And I think here it's limited to just like a one-off joke or something. Like there's just a line he
Some other guy went to recall and dreamed he was King of Mars or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. This movie, definitely doesn't include the Mars stuff. It does include, because like obviously the original Total Recall does have the class aspect of it, and so that is something I feel like they're amplifying even more here, is kind of dispensing with some of the kind of extraterrestrial locations and kind of dialing it more into a divide just on Earth between Australia and the UFB or whatever it's called.
And like the original movie, there is a odd number of breasts in this film.
There are.
The total sum of breasts is an odd number.
It is. You see 3 breasts in this film, and not on 2 people. But they do
that would
throw
be
that
normal.
in. Yeah. I mean, I guess the average of breasts on the planet would be slightly less than 2, I would assume, simply because, stuff happens.
The average person, the average person has less than 2 arms, has less than 2 legs.
Yeah. The average woman would have less than 2 breasts. Yeah,
okay.
It's pretty common. But there, I do, and maybe there's a person with 3 out there. I don't want to speculate, but it's they do throw that in there though. They make sure to get the 3-breasted woman in the Total Recall reboot. a completely throwaway scene that didn't need to be there at all. You know, it was just there to kind of Leo point at, but hey, it's there. But yeah, so we definitely emphasize the class aspects a little bit there. They kind of ramp that up much more and kind of I mean, that's literally the plot of this movie. Much like the original was the idea that Cohagen was going to kind of, you know, kill off the people that lived in the lower rent areas of Mars. That's the entire plot here. And Cohagen is basically the leader of the government who just decides that he's going to wipe out the low income, kind of lower class settlements, take it all over, and just use synthetics to run everything. Definitely not a situation we as a society will ever find ourselves in, hopefully. But yeah, I don't know where I was going with this.
I don't know. We got lost in the boobs, Andrew. But
We did.
if you were to tell me this hypothetical situation where you put this movie on for me on mute, let's say, and I could just visually look at this city in this movie, and you told me it was a remake of a sci-fi classic, I'd be, oh, of course, this is Blade Runner. Like, the slums of this movie look so like a modern take on Blade Runner. And I don't even mean this in a bad way. I think it looks pretty good. I like the design of this city. I think as much as people complained this movie didn't go to Mars, I think it was a smart way to differentiate it from that first movie, but still, as you've established talking about that original story, it's still very much in the vein of the original story. But I like the slums. It's almost like the city, parts of it were like floating. Like there's this big rooftop chase across these, like, you know, again, slums, but it's on like these floating platforms. I just, in general, it does a really good job of the Blade Runner thing where it's like futuristic but dirty and grimy at the same time.
Everything's so wet.
Yes,
all wet.
Wet
like
and
every
rusty,
stone surface is
green
wet.
metal. Yeah.
Well, and
sure.
it's an interesting. Well, and I like the green metal stuff too, because you know that's what happens to Statue of Liberty, man. That's what happens when you're exposed to salt water. But it's I like it too, just because it's doing that like blend of cultures too, which you see in Blade Runner. To be fair, you see stuff like Fifth Element too, where like we as a populace kind of expand over the whole planet, so the world cultures all get baked in. There's a lot of like Chinese, Japanese type iconography that you can see here, some cultural markings and things like that too, where you see like Chinese design choices being kind of factored into some of these buildings. And like I said, I'm not going to say this is the first movie to do it, but watching it back, I was like, oh, I didn't even remember that it did stuff like that. I didn't even remember that like it had these kind of interesting design choices. And I'm not going to lie to you, if their apartment is in a slum, it's still bigger than most apartments I've ever lived in. But I thought it was a really cool choice to at least try to create a semi-unique design aesthetic. But I will say it is far more reminiscent of something like Blade Runner than it is Total Recall.
For sure. I like the future technology. I also think is, for the most part, understated in a cool way. Like a lot of the dickness they really hit head on, and at least in my version, like there's flashbacks to key scenes that are really kind of handholdy. In fact, another thing that I think might only be in the director's cut is at the end of the movie, he looks at his arm and he no longer has the peace symbol tattoo that they gave him. I don't know if that was in the theatrical, but this movie ends with him looking, he doesn't have the tattoo, and like he decides he doesn't care. It's kind of like an Inception type ending. Like he almost decides,
yeah,
I don't need to know the truth. I'm gonna choose this. So it hits those pretty hard. But the technology side, I think, is a little more understated, which I liked. Like the flying cars, but they're more like hover cars, and it establishes that they run on like use of magnets in some way. Because for the most part, they're just hovering off the ground. And then in one cliche scene, they are underneath the road. So they're like attached to the road above them magnetically, and he overrides that for them to drop off of the road. And then he turns it back on in time to save them from crashing to the ground. But the scene where it crashes onto a vehicle without touching the vehicle is super creative. And
it was so cool.
cool.
I I genuinely, when that happened in the movie, because, well, I also like that too, because it's establishing that there's this whole UFB thing in the sky, but then there's still this stuff on the ground.
Yeah.
So we're establishing that there's a whole lot of different stuff here. But yeah, like as it hit, and you're fully expecting the car to just crash into the other car.
Yeah.
And then like it literally like turns back on, and then just like the whatever you would call it, the method it uses to float, the pressure of that just crushes the car instead. I was like, that's awesome. I was like, that's so cool. Like
that's super creative.
It's awesome. And yeah, it's interesting because like it's clearly futuristic, but the guns are still relatively low tech. Like the guns are not particularly like they're not lasers or anything, I don't think.
Well, I was going to point out the gun that shoots like the LED lights that wrap around you.
Yeah.
And then it magnetically, like he can use the gun to pick you up and slam you down. It's such a video game thing.
Right.
Like shooting somebody with I don't know what you call that, a magnet gun, and then you can control the gravity or whatever. Like you can pick them up and slam them down. So I wouldn't call that low tech, but I mean, it's just cool. It's just creative.
Yeah,
and
it's just cool.
Understated.
It passes the rule of cool. I thought that was really. I genuinely thought that was another cool sequence there. I like the elevators that move all different directions.
Yeah,
like they're not just up and down; they're moving back and forth.
It's like the rooms in Cabin in the Woods.
Yeah,
that hold all the creatures.
But purposely designed that way to just transport you instead of holding creatures. I did like the line. It's one of the few kind of genuine, kind of almost jokes in the movie. But they crash into one elevator, and there's of course some normal people standing there, and they're just in there. And Colin Farrell just goes like, "Is this going down?" And they just don't say. They just don't say anything. So he goes like, "No, no," and then like the doors open, and I was like, there's the Colin Farrell that I know and love with his sardonic, dry sense of humor. Could have used a little. I'm just saying you could have used a little more of that #PP. But it was also, it just caught me off guard because like I wasn't expecting an actual joke in that moment.
A little quip, yeah. It's not a very quippy movie.
Yeah, and so when suddenly there was a quip, I was just like, there might have been a little bit more here if you'd leaned into that just a skosh.
They really established. I mean, like in the opening text of this movie, like. There's an elevator that goes through the core of the earth connecting these two areas. And I don't think the science of this is very sound. I know I'm watching the movie wrong, but like it travels from essentially Australia to Great Britain, and like halfway through traveling through the earth, the gravity shifts. I don't think gravity works that way. I don't think there's a point in the center of the earth that everything's attracted to. It's the earth itself. So that being said, I don't know how gravity would work if you traveled through the center of the earth. But at any rate, all it is just a big setup for a huge set piece at the end of this movie. That's all that matters. So like while the elevator's in the center of the earth, gravity is almost turned off for a moment. And in the final action scene, they just get this cool thing where he gets to like use his gun
gravity thing,
to like propel himself through the air, which is
I don't know that that's how that would work either. But
I don't know.
Well, and it's interesting because we're not, and because gravity is a force that ultimately tethers us to the earth. So there is some kind of effect there. I would be curious. I'm sure somebody would know something. I mean, the reality is that you go through the center of the earth, it's going to kill you because. It's the center of gravitational mass of the planet, and it's super hot. So you're not going to make it through. And they do have like at a certain point, they're clearly going through like the molten core. And he points out they have to wait until they're through the core in order to jump out. But yeah, I mean, but at a certain point, gravity would have to switch because you would be tethered on one way down, and then you would be tethered the other way on the other side. So like, I don't know. It's not for me to figure out.
Yeah,
I don't know. Makes for cool action sequences.
That's all that
matters.
I'll tell you that. That's all that matters here. I mean, do we need to talk about like the finale of the thing? I think we kind of already mentioned it already. Like he's presented with these two paths, these two pasts, I should say, where one he was a resistance fighter that lost his memory, and one where he was working for Cohagen and infiltrated the bad guys before his memory gets wiped, or infiltrated the resistance. I'm confusing myself here. He has a past where he was a good guy, a past where he's a bad guy, and he just decides which one he wants to be, which I think is pretty cool. I think it's definitely different from the first one, which is important when you do these kind of things, like a remake of a well-known science fiction thing. You got to find your own kind of slant on the story. He chooses being a good guy. It's cool.
And, and like the question it leaves on, or the question the movie basically presents, is you're essentially told that at a certain point, Hauser decided to defect. But then, obviously, Cohagen throws some question onto that being, did he actually defect? Was it all just part of the act? Was he just trying to play Quaid against it again? You don't really know. But then he, like you said, he makes the decision that, no, this is what I'm going with. I'm staying here. And I'm going to stick with being the good guy. And, I think it, again, reinforces why that scene where he does ultimately shoot Harry is so important, because that is the step that leads him to that decision. And, I dig it. He stops the bad guys. That's what he does. The movie, for everything that it does, the ending is just very much a classic big action blow-up sequence where the whole, we can mention it and just... Basically, Cohagen's plan is to use the synthetics to invade the colony where all the lower class slums are and just kill everybody. And then just take over that land, which, you wouldn't think that you could just do that, but he was going to. And so what Quaid and Molina do is they essentially destroy the transport system between the sides, at least for now. And assumedly, you would hope that the conspiracy is revealed. But who knows? That's not what the story's about.
Yeah, and then I think it's the director's cut thing. There's one last scare, so to speak, where after the big climax, Quaid wakes up in the back of an ambulance and Jessica Biel is there, and she's holding his hand, but she doesn't have the scar, and so he slams her against the wall, and then like her neck cloaking device malfunctions, and you see it's actually Kate Beckinsale. They have a fight in the ambulance, and then he kills her.
That's in the theatrical.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
It was cool.
You get a hint of that.
Very much like a slasher film, like with one last jump scare.
Yeah, one last scare. But they play with that a little bit when Quaid does try to go back. See, in this one, he's not going to Mars. He's just going to the UFB. And he has the neck thing, and it kind of malfunctions. And that's when you kind of... And they do the 2 weeks joke here at one point, but that the joke is that the woman you would think is him is not... It's just a different person.
Great casting. There. Like, how did they cast a woman that looks like
that looks so much like that? But anyway, that was a fun little. So there are definitely some fun little nods here to the original film, but largely, like you said, it's not going for the same aesthetic and it's not telling the same story. Which, if you're gonna do it, I guess I support that decision to be like, you know what, let's just not try to do that story, especially when it's so iconic. Yeah. That we get that last little scare there, and then we get the decision to stay with the good guys.
Well, Andrew, as I said, I didn't think I'd ever see this movie. Now I have, and coming up next week is another movie that I never saw until now. We've got to prepare for this podcast, and we'll be watching The Day the Earth Stood Still, the remake starring Keanu Reeves. This is the one that I intentionally resigned myself to never watching. I just never got around to it. And then, honestly, I feel like this one kind of is forgotten, but not by us. We've remembered, and we will be covering it next week. But Day the Earth Stood Still, Andrew, is that one that you've seen?
Yeah, Once Upon a Time when it came out, just because I've seen the original, and was just curious about a remake with Keanu Reeves. I thought that was an interesting idea, and I saw it once and didn't really think about it since. So,
sounds pretty similar, but we'll be thinking about it again next week on this podcast. But for now, it's time for the question of the week. And if you want to leave us a question for a future episode, you can do exactly that by jumping into our Discord. There's a link in the show notes. Just go click on that link, join us in the server, and hang out with the community. And as I said, there's a spot for you to leave questions, just like that guy in Doom who says, if you had a monument of horror directors like Mount Rushmore, who would be on it? And they list some examples, but I think I'm going to stop it right there and not be influenced by who they're suggesting. We'll come back to it. But Mount Rushmore of horror directors. Andrew, this is a common question, like who would be on the Mount Rushmore of blank? Like I hear it brought up with wrestling all the time. And I think there's kind of two ways to look at it. Because there's 4 people on Mount Rushmore. So you can either do like, there's 4, right? Not 5?
There's 4 on Mount Rushmore.
Okay, all right. Just want to make sure I get that part right. Some people look at it as like the 4 best or most influential, like the 4 biggest. But Mount Rushmore, I feel like is kind of, its purpose is like, almost like founding father-y, like setting, like paving the way, like foundational. So I feel like if you look at it that way, you have to have like a cutoff point for like who you put on there. So like, who are the 4 that really kickstarted this thing, or who are the 4 best of all time? Where do you tend to go with how you tackle the Mount Rushmore question?
I don't do it.
Okay, that's the end of our episode. Thank you for the question.
No, I used to be that guy that was always just like, who's the best, who's the best guitar player of all time? And like all my friends were like, it's Jimi Hendrix. And I had the friends that were like, it's Eric Clapton. And then like, I always like was David Gilmour, the guy from Pink Floyd was always my favorite. But people would always be like, well, you got to listen to this because, this is going to, I'm like, well, that's cool. But like, that doesn't hit me like this does. And they would be like, but that's not as fast. And I was like, okay, well, fast is different. The goalposts are never static for the sort of thing of like what makes somebody the best. But if we're going to play this game, I haven't seen who Definitely Not My Brother put as his guesses. There's some classic hallmarks that people bring up a lot. But as far as who goes on it, it's a tough question. Like foundational feels like that's the one that people go like who creates the template that we all follow basically. And then who's using that template the best, who's moving it forward. So it tends to be older directors. They tend to be the focus just because they're the ones that kind of set the stage. And if I had to guess, I'd assume Alfred Hitchcock is where a lot of people start. He's Psycho alone is seen as by many as the first slasher movie. Essentially, a lot of his other movies do play with a lot of tropes that horror movies would later use to come, and I would probably say that Alfred Hitchcock would be on my list as far as foundationally creating a lot of the things that horror would go on to use to greater potential effect. But I'd say Alfred Hitchcock is where a lot of people start as the first spot.
Do you want me to tell you if that's one of the ones he put on here?
Sure.
Yes, he does list Alfred Hitchcock, and I would have to agree with that. I think whether you're doing like all-time best or foundational, I think either way, you've got to throw Hitchcock on there because even though he's not always straight horror, he's the master of suspense. I mean, like anything that makes a horror movie work, you can find in a Alfred Hitchcock movie. So I think that one's a pretty easy slam dunk. But after that, it starts to get really interesting. Like, you say John Carpenter for Halloween, mainly. I mean, like a really...
Yeah.
You can debate if it's the first slasher, but it's kind of the first modern slasher in a way. Well, I guess Black Christmas is. But, there's a lot of things that start with Halloween. But he also does things like The Thing, which, again, maybe not straight horror. It's still playing in those horror elements. And certainly, you talk about influence. I would venture to guess there's not a single horror director since his time that isn't influenced by John Carpenter or his films. I think that one's not a bad place to go as well.
I would agree. I mean, but you look at Halloween, and you've got stuff that's a little bit more straight kind of suspense thriller with him, too, with stuff like Big Trouble in Little China is an action comedy, like straight up. There's a couple of like scenes that like lean into some horror elements, but otherwise, Big Trouble in Little China is not a movie that should scare anyone. Stuff like They Live or Escape from New York or even Assault on Precinct 13, like they're not movies that I think are going to be like scary, but you watch something like Halloween and then you watch something like The Fog. You watch Christine, you watch In the Mouth of Madness or Prince of Darkness. Like he definitely lives in that horror genre, and as Halloween alone establishes pretty much all the tropes that 80s slashers were going to just rip off wholesale for the entire decade. So I would put John Carpenter there as well with a bullet. A lot of people just really like John Carpenter. They think he's, just a cool dude. So I think he would probably end up on anybody's list as well.
He was listed by that guy in Doom, and the third one that guy in Doom lists is the one where I start to question it. It's Wes Craven. Now, it's really not a crazy take, but if you talk about influence and foundational, I think he's playing in a sandbox that was already created. You think of, Nightmare on Elm Street, and certainly he takes it to some interesting meta places, continues on with Scream. So I think there's an argument there.
I would say there's an argument for Wes Craven.
But it's not as much of a slam dunk as the last two that we talked about.
Probably not, but Wes Craven, I think, for the Nightmare on Elm Street to Nightmare on Elm Street 3 to New Nightmare to Scream path alone, I think carved out a really influential path and carved out not just doing a slightly different take on the slasher, because he's the first guy that with the slasher was kind of like, I'm just not going to pretend the guy's not supernatural. He is. That's it. I'm not gonna, with Halloween or Nightmare or Friday the 13th, there's this notion of are they supernatural? Why do they keep coming back? Who knows? But with that one, you kind of had somebody that was just not just am I not gonna play the whole is he supernatural or not game. I'm gonna put him in a complete fantasy element. And I think there's something to be said for that.
He's not shy about look, the slasher is the main character.
Right.
He's the star. He has a personality.
The first one to kind of make the slasher the star, essentially.
Yeah, totally.
There's a personality, there's dialogue, there's interesting things that they're doing. And that
continued with Ghostface.
With Ghostface, yeah. To a degree. Ghostface is the lead character.
Way.
Whereas Freddy's the same person every time, Ghostface isn't. That's the only caveat I'd say, where Ghostface isn't necessarily evolving from film to film in the sense that he is and he isn't. It's a different thing. But I think I've talked about this before. I'm pretty sure because have we talked about Wes Craven here before? Yes, we have.
Ghost somewhere.
No, we have.
Ghost. Excuse me. We've talked about him offhand.
Nightmare on Elm Street 2. We did Nightmare on Elm Street 2. I'm sure we talked about Wes Craven.
Yeah.
He didn't direct Nightmare on Elm Street 2, but I'm sure we talked about him there. But have we not done a Wes Craven movie? That seems insane.
What would we do?
I don't know. We didn't do
Swamp Thing.
We did Scream 4. Didn't we do Scream 4? Scream 3.
We did Scream 3.
We did Scream 3. So we talked about Wes Craven there. It's a I was gonna say he did Scream 2, Scream 3. We're Red Eye, dude. Red Eye rules.
Great movie.
It's just great. But I think the path from Nightmare on Elm Street, and this isn't even talking about something like Last House on the Left, which is actually genuinely seen by many as one of the most influential, brutal horror films ever made in the early 70s. He makes Last House on the Left 12 years before Nightmare on Elm Street. So he's out there doing Last House on the Left, The Hills Have Eyes in the 70s. And then he does Swamp Thing. Which is a bit of a change, and then does Nightmare on Elm Street, and then also writes Nightmare on Elm Street 3, which is the one that kind of introduces the idea back that not just is the killer in the dream world, so are the people he's trying to go after. So it introduces the concepts of we can fight back against him here. And then taking that to New Nightmare, which is the pushing of the horror concepts into the real world, into Scream, which is this own meta takedown of essentially a genre he's foundational in. I would lean more on the side of Wes Craven does belong there versus doesn't. There's a lot of, I will say, Wes Craven's filmography is also filled with a lot of other stuff that people are not as big of fans of. But I think that the argument to put him there is stronger than the argument to not put him there.
I think I've kind of come around. I think I'm maybe a little bit sold. The fact that it's the same person behind Last House on the Left, behind Freddy Krueger, and behind Scream. That's three pretty heavy hitters. So I guess the question is how many does it take to get you on this mountain? Because that guy in Doom says those three for sure, and then asks who else would be on there, and throws out George A. Romero, which again, there's an argument. I mean, Night of the Living Dead, you can't overstate how influential that is, but he is just so specific to zombies for me that I don't know if that is influential on horror as a whole. And maybe that's not fair. I mean, zombies are as horror as it gets, and again, the fact that he did it in 1968 is crazy impressive. But another name I want to throw out there is Tobe Hooper, who does the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Predates Halloween, and I think predates Black Christmas. It's not it might not fit all the rules of a slasher.
Black Christmas, I think, is 74. So
same year. But he writes and directs that, and it is one of the most unnerving movies I've ever seen. Like, it is one of the greatest horror movies
I don't know that I'll ever watch it again in my life.
It is on that short list for me. Yeah. In fact, I bought the 4K not too long ago, and I was like, why? Like, I just feel like I should own it, but like, am I gonna watch this in all its 4K glory? I don't know. But it's very influential. But beyond that, I mean, he also directs Poltergeist, which is not a small thing. Life Force has a cult following, but it gets hard to find sort of his other heavy hitters, so to speak, and his career really kind of peters out. Sounds
but
mean, but yeah, as far as like his landmark work is definitely the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and I guess we can include Poltergeist too. But is that enough to get you on the mountain?
And I don't know. And I feel like it's easy. Like, I feel like Craven, Carpenter, and Hitchcock are just like easy answers too. Like, it's just they're the biggest names, they're the biggest guys. And so there's a piece of my brain that like, and you don't have to be 4, but like, you don't want this to be a list of 10 guys. But at the same time, like, it kind of is. Like, it's tough to say any one genre is defined by 4 people, because you could look back at somebody like Terrence Fisher, who directed a lot of the Hammer horror films of the 50s and the 40s and the 50s with like Christopher Lee. Like, he directed Dracula, he directed Frankenstein, he directed The Mummy. It's like, you direct all 3 of the classic Universal monsters, and admittedly not in those movies, but like, that's 3 lasting legacy characters. You look at somebody like William Castle, who did the original House on Haunted Hill with Vincent Price, and then went on to do stuff like 13 Ghosts. It's like, okay, like, is this foundational? Like, is this leading to Hitchcock stats? Is this leading to other things? And then you're not even diving into like Korean horror or Japanese horror. You're not even diving into any of the stuff behind like The Ring or what's the other one that just like, even like you said, the stuff I just watched, like Gunjiam Haunted Asylum, stuff like where you're so focused on American horror, you're not looking at horror as a whole around the world. And it turns out they make really good horror movies everywhere. And now, to be fair, the 3 guys we have listed, I think most horror directors, especially now, are probably going to name those guys as being foundational. Yeah. They're going to name those guys as being super important. And so, but that 4th or 5th spot, that's going to be the tough one. Because like you said, you talk about Romero, and I feel bad about Romero too, because like, that dude definitely wanted to do other things. But he very much reached a point in his career where like, if he wasn't going to make a zombie movie, studios didn't care. They were like, we're not, we don't want to give you $5 million if you're not going to give us a zombie movie. And even Craven ran into problems like that. That dude was still having insane studio interference on some of his later films. I talked about Cursed before, where that movie was completely shot before Weinstein said, nah, redo it. So there's a whole different version of that movie with a whole different cast of Cursed that exists because the studio wanted it differently. And I've heard people throw out Sam Raimi before as a potential person to be on the list. Just,
man,
from
that's great. Yeah.
Evil Dead, from stuff like Drag Me to Hell. But even then, it's Evil Dead that's Drag Me to Hell. Like,
yeah, which one there? Is? I mean, it's Evil Dead, really. Let's be honest. Like,
well, I mean, but that's my point. Is he's got those things, but like, what is it beyond that? Like,
yeah,
I'm not saying those aren't great. They are.
That's the question. Where like, is one landmark entrance enough to get you on the mountain? I don't know, but I will say at least the Evil Dead, in my opinion, that's where horror comedy starts and is so insanely influential, and it's one of my favorite corners of the horror universe. So like, he owns the origins of horror comedy. But I don't know. It's tough. And then you look at like modern guys like James Wan and Lee Winnell and what they've done,
Jordan
or
Peele, I mean,
Robert Eggers, Jordan Peele. Like, it would sound strange for us to say right now to put them on this mountain, but 10, 20 years from now, they might have 3, 4, 5 movies that have stood the test of time and are insanely influential. So I don't know.
I mean, and like Dario Argento, I didn't even mention him. Like Dario Argento or Lucio Fulci, like those are, you know, Italian directors that were making stuff like The Bird with Crystal Plumage and stuff like that are these kind of horror inspired mystery movies where it's very clearly like a whodunit slasher 20 years before that was a thing. And, you know, you know, Mario Bava, even with just these Italian directors that were out there making horror movies at the same time and making these kind of going for the more gory stuff far before that was really a thing in American cinema. And it's a tough question. And, you know, David Cronenberg, you know, I haven't even mentioned him. People have mentioned David Cronenberg a lot with all the body horror stuff that he did. You know, it's not necessarily like slasher horror, but you look at stuff like The Fly or Videodrome or any of that, like there's definitely horror elements to these films. And I've even heard people call David Lynch a horror director. I don't really agree with that one. I don't really think David Lynch belongs on the list. I do love David Lynch, but I wouldn't put him there. It's a tough question. It's very hard.
Did you mention Dario Argento? In your rattling off some foreign directors, because Suspiria, which is something that's on my mind because we talked about it recently. Okay. Yeah, it's tough, but help us out. I mean, I want to know from you, how do you look at the Mount Rushmore question? Do you look at influence or greatest of all time, and how do you round out this horror director Mount Rushmore? Because I genuinely, just like that guy in Doom right again here, I have a hard time settling on the fourth spot. I can feel pretty comfortable with this first three, but a fourth spot, because I think the problem is immediately you start thinking about, okay, if I put Toby Hooper on there, I'm eliminating everyone else we just talked about. You know, it's the finality of like saying this is the fourth guy, no one else makes the cut. And even though this literally means nothing, Andrew, we're not actually sculpting this mountain, we are just talking on a podcast, I still feel that pressure of like, well, I can't just definitively say it's this person, because what about this person, So
yeah,
I'll throw it to you.
And this, like I said, not even talking about like Takashi Miike, who did Audition, which is a absolutely terrifying horror movie from Japan, made tons and tons of stuff. It's like there's directors all like the fourth spot I think is the hardest thing. And even like, and I'm sure that like you just stick straight to like the 60s and the 70s, you can find your four guys that defined horror. Like you can find, and like even supplanting potentially guys like Carpenter and Craven. But like it's a tough thing, because again, just doing, because it feels like a version of a best of list, and those can just go on forever, because what makes something the best? What makes something foundational? What is foundational? Like, you know, Carpenter was clearly influenced by things. Are those influences more important than what he did with those influences? Like, you look at Tarantino, like Tarantino's, you know, when you're talking about like the influences versus the influenced, like
yeah, I mean, Hitchcock was influenced by people. Like, I mean, there's silent film era. I mean, Nosferatu, like, is influenced, you know, every...
I mean, the original Universal horror films, like, we're not even talking about, like, the Bela Lugosi Dracula or the Boris Karloff Mummy or Frankenstein or whatever. Like, those are foundational as well. And but it's a tough question, because, and like I said, you know, and even, like, Hitchcock feels like a slam dunk, but, like, is it that much of a slam dunk? Because, like you said, everything feeds everything else. There was, you know, John Paul Jones, bassist for Led Zeppelin, said once, everything's an influence. Everything you ever see in your life is an influence. Everything you hear in your life is an influence. Even if that influence is, oh, don't like that. Like, that's still an influence in a way. And so everything builds on everything. And, you know, sometimes those influences culminate in something great, and sometimes it's well-intentioned but not great, and sometimes it's just bad. #PP. But it's a tough thing. But thankfully, we're not gonna disgrace any seminal Native American or Native American icons by carving pictures of white dudes on them.
You know, I was gonna sidestep that whole part of the Mount Rushmore question, but
I figure that's the best way to end it.
Yeah, that's done.
We won't do that.
I want your help rounding out this Mount Rushmore, which now sounds strange to say that. But let us know who your fourth is, or maybe you disagree with 1, 2, or 3. Let us know in that Discord or social media. Hit us up. We want to hear from you. And come back next week for The Day the Earth Stood Still. And until then, just remember that maybe not every movie is great,
but all movies have greatness.
Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. You can find him on Instagram at NotThatMarkAnthony. And thanks to Mitch for our music. Follow him on Twitter at I'm a Biggie Boy, and check our show notes for the SoundCloud link. Check out our store on TeePublic for some Best of the Rest merch. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend, because that's the only way that we grow. And follow us on social media at BOTRcast. Thank you.
They do throw that in there, though. They make sure to get the three-breasted woman in the Total Recall reboot. It's a completely throwaway scene that didn't need to be there at all. You know, it was just there to kind of Leo point at. But hey, it's there.
I pointed.
I pointed. And she pointed back 3 times. You can please cut that. But oh no, how much of a fool am I going to be on this edited podcast?
1.
How much of a fool am I going to be on this
Dos.
podcast? How much of a fool am I going to be on this podcast? How much of a fool am I going to be on this podcast? How much of a fool am I going to be on this podcast? How much of a fool am I going to be on this podcast? How much of a fool am I going to be on this podcast? How much of a fool am I going to be on this podcast? How much of a fool am I going to be? How much of a fool am I going to be? Gravitas.